In the dark basement of a cursed mansion, Mayor Thompson points a gun at veteran Arthur Corrigan, ready to pull the trigger and bury a 3-decade-long secret for good. But Art's dog Max bravely stands between his master and the perpetrator. In this life-or-death moment, Max does the unthinkable. He gently nudges a silver locket, which has just fallen from a crack in the wall, toward the killer. This strange act, a message from the forgotten spirits, is about to shatter a wall of silence and expose a truth far more horrifying than any rumor about the house. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The old Ford rattled down a 2-lane road that cut through a dense forest of pine and maple. Arthur Corrigan kept a steady hand on the wheel, his knuckles white. Beside him in the passenger seat, Max sat tall, his noble head framed by the window. The late autumn air of rural Maine, crisp and smelling of damp earth and wood smoke, washed over them. Max's ears twitched, catching sounds Art couldn't, but his gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, a silent, steady presence. Max was a 5-year-old German shepherd, a magnificent animal with a thick coat of slate-gray and silver-white fur that seemed to absorb the muted light of the overcast sky. He had been Art's shadow for 4 years, ever since the day they were paired together in a dusty, sun-baked landscape half a world away. Their bond wasn't just that of a man and his dog. It was the unspoken trust of 2 soldiers who had seen the worst of the world together and had promised to get each other home. They had succeeded, but home had proven to be its own kind of battlefield. Art, now 42, was a man carved from a different time. He was tall and lean, with a strength that came not from muscle, but from sheer endurance. His brown hair, cut short in the military style he never abandoned, was showing silver at the temples, and his face was a roadmap of hardship. The lines around his eyes spoke of vigilance, but the eyes themselves, a deep and thoughtful blue, held a kindness that the world had tried and failed to extinguish. He wore his usual attire, a faded navy blue and gray plaid shirt over a plain gray t-shirt, worn denim jeans, and sturdy work boots that had seen better days. He glanced at Max, whose calm breathing was a familiar rhythm against the engine's groan. "Almost there, buddy," Art murmured, his voice a low rumble. Max's tail gave a single, soft thump against the seat. They were running on fumes, both in the truck's gas tank and in Art's spirit. The last of his savings had vanished months ago, swallowed by the final, crushing medical bills for his late wife, Chloe, and the subsequent foreclosure. His PTSD made holding a steady job impossible. The nightmares that stalked his sleep often bled into his waking hours, making the noise and crowds of normal life feel like an ambush. He had nothing left but this truck, a few boxes of memories, and the unwavering loyalty of the dog beside him. Then he had seen the ad, buried in an online classified section for a county he'd never heard of. A historic mansion for sale, $1, must sell. It was an act of pure desperation, a final, blind leap of faith. He had called the number, spoken to a brisk real estate agent named Miss Peters, and sent his last crumpled dollar bill in an envelope. As the truck crested a small hill, a weathered wooden sign came into view. "Welcome to Blackwood Creek." The name sent a strange, cold shiver down Art's spine. Blackwood Creek. He was certain he had never heard it before, yet it felt familiar, like a word from a half-forgotten dream. He slowed the truck, his brow furrowed in concentration, trying to grasp the thread of a memory that wasn't there. Chloe had been a journalist, always chasing stories in forgotten corners of the country. Had she mentioned it once? He couldn't be sure. The memory was just a faint echo, a whisper of recognition that made him uneasy. But it was that same inexplicable feeling that had sealed his decision. He had to come here. Miss Peters, a woman in a sensible pantsuit whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes, was waiting for them at the foot of a long, overgrown driveway. She handed him an old brass key and a thin folder of paperwork without getting out of her car. "It's all yours, Mr. Corrigan," she said, her voice strained with an eagerness to be anywhere else. "As is." Before Art could say more than a simple thank you, her car was kicking up gravel as she sped away. Art turned to face his new home. The Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house, it was a relic, a Gothic specter of stone and timber that rose 3 stories into the gray sky. Time and neglect had taken their toll. The slate roof was missing tiles, the wraparound porch sagged, and most of the tall, arched windows were boarded up like blind eyes. Yet, even in its decay, it was strangely beautiful, a monument of sorrow and forgotten grandeur. "Well, Max," Art said softly, his breath misting in the air. "It's big." Max whined, a low note of uncertainty in his throat, and pressed closer to Art's leg as they walked up the cracked stone path to the massive oak front door. The brass key turned in the lock with a painful screech of metal on metal. The air inside was heavy and cold, thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and old secrets. They spent the first few hours in a daze, clearing a small space in what might have been a living room. They laid out their sleeping bags, a small camp stove, and a lantern. As dusk settled, casting long, distorted shadows across the peeling wallpaper, the house began to speak. It groaned and sighed, the settling of old bones, the whisper of wind through broken panes. Art was on edge, every creak a potential threat. But it was Max who was truly distressed. He refused to lie down, pacing the perimeter of their small camp of light, his body tense. A low growl rumbled in his chest, directed at the dark corners of the room. "Easy, boy," Art whispered, reaching out to stroke his back. "It's just an old house." But as the night deepened, Max's agitation grew. He stopped pacing and stood utterly still, his head cocked, staring intently at a section of wall in the adjoining room, a small bedroom off the main parlor. Then he began to bark. It was not his protective warning bark, but a sharp, frantic sound filled with an urgency that made Art's skin crawl. "Max, quiet," Art commanded, but the dog ignored him. He ran into the dark bedroom and began scratching furiously at the wall, his claws tearing at the faded floral wallpaper. Art followed, his heart pounding. "Max, what is it? Stop!" He grabbed Max's collar, but the dog was consumed by his task, whining and digging as if trying to unearth something vital. Frustrated and unnerved, Art shone his lantern on the spot. The wallpaper was already shredded, revealing the pale, cracked plaster beneath, and on that plaster, he saw them. Scratched into the wall with what looked like a nail, or perhaps a child's fingernail, were names. Emma, age 12, Michael, age 9, Sarah, age 7. A dozen names, each followed by an age, all of them children. They were faint and small, ghosts of words left behind long ago. The cold that washed over Art had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was a deep, primal chill. Max stopped scratching and looked up at him, his intelligent eyes filled with a sad, knowing look. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves of the Blackwood Manor, sounding for all the world like a sorrowful whisper of forgotten names. Sleep did not come easily that first night, nor on the nights that followed. The carved names on the bedroom wall replayed in Art's mind. He tried to rationalize them, telling himself it was just morbid graffiti left by teenagers who had broken in over the years. This town had a tragedy, and kids had a dark sense of humor. It had to be that. But the explanation felt as hollow as the wind whistling through the manor's eaves. For the first few days, Art threw himself into the practical work of survival. He patched the leakiest parts of the roof, cleared a space in the kitchen, and methodically boarded up the most shattered windows, trying to impose some small order on the vast chaos of the house. Through it all, Max was a constant, steady presence, but his behavior had changed. He no longer paid any attention to the wall with the names. His focus had shifted, narrowing to a single, inexplicable point of interest. In the center of the small bedroom where they'd found the carvings, Max had chosen a spot on the floor. At first, he would simply lie there, watchful and still, for hours at a time. He would follow Art from room to room, but whenever Art settled down to work, Max would retreat to the bedroom and lie on that same patch of dark, warped floorboards. "What is it, boy?" Art asked on the second day, trying to coax him away with a piece of jerky. Max took the treat, licked Art's hand, and immediately returned to his spot. By the third day, the stillness had turned into a quiet restlessness. Max would lie on the floorboards and emit a low, mournful whine from deep in his chest. It was a sound that tugged at Art's frayed nerves, a constant quiet lament in the oppressive silence of the house. "Max, leave it," Art would command, his voice tight with frustration. "There's nothing there," he reasoned. "There must be a mouse nest, or maybe the scent of some long-dead animal trapped beneath the floor." On the fourth day, Max's persistence escalated into action. He began to scratch. Not the frantic, desperate digging he had directed at the wall, but a steady, deliberate scraping at one particular floorboard. The sound was methodical, maddening. Scrape, scrape, pause. Scrape, scrape, pause. It echoed through the empty manor, a rhythmic indictment of Art's denial. "Enough!" Art finally snapped, his voice echoing in the large room. Max stopped and looked at him, his head cocked, a look of patient insistence in his intelligent eyes before lowering his head and scratching again. Art felt a surge of guilt. This dog had saved his life more than once, had dragged him from the grip of nightmares, had grounded him when the world dissolved into chaos. His instincts were not to be ignored. Sighing in defeat, Art walked into the bedroom. "Okay, buddy, you win. Let's see what's got you so worked up." He knelt down and ran his hand over the board. It was like any other, worn smooth with age. He knocked on it with his knuckles. The sound was solid. He knocked on the boards next to it, then knocked on Max's chosen board again. This time, he heard it. A subtle, yet distinct difference. A dull, hollow thud. His curiosity now fully engaged, Art went to his truck and returned with a small crowbar. He wedged the tip into the thin gap between the boards and pushed. The old wood groaned in protest, the nails screeching as they surrendered their hold after decades. The board splintered slightly, but came loose. Art lifted it away and shone his lantern into the dark space beneath. He saw nothing but dust, cobwebs, and the dark, packed earth of the foundation. He felt a wave of disappointment. It really was just a mouse. But as he moved the lantern beam across the space, he saw it. Tucked away between two floor joists was a small, dark bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied securely with twine. His heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He reached into the crawl space, his fingers closing around the surprisingly dry package. He brought it out into the lantern light and carefully untied the twine. The oilcloth was stiff, but had done its job perfectly. Inside was a small, leather-bound diary, its cover scorched black along the edges as if it had been near a fire. Art sat back on his heels, the small book feeling unnervously heavy in his hands. He opened it. The pages were brittle and yellowed, but the handwriting inside was the neat, careful script of a young girl. The first entry was dated April 1994. "My name is Lila Catherine Morrison," it began. "I am 12 years old. Mrs. Fletcher said I should keep this diary to write down my thoughts so I do not cause trouble. Lila." It wasn't one of the names he had seen on the wall. He turned the page. The early entries painted a picture of a lonely but hopeful child trying to make the best of her new life at the Blackwood Creek Home for Children. She wrote about chores, lessons, and the other children. But as he read further, through the months of May and June, the tone of the diary began to change. June 12, 1994. "Mr. Simon Blackwood locked our dormitory door again tonight. He says it is for our safety, to keep intruders out, but it feels like he is trying to keep us in. Michael said he feels like we are in a prison. The 5th of July, 1994, another boy ran away yesterday. At least, that is what Mr. Blackwood told the social worker. But we all saw him take the boy into his office. We did not see him leave. The door to the basement is locked all the time now. I do not like the sounds that come from down there." The last entry was dated the 1st of August, 1994. Art's blood ran cold as he read the shaky, hurried words. "I can smell smoke again. It is stronger this time. I tried to wake Mr. Blackwood, but his door is locked. The little ones are crying. The knob on our door is hot. If someone finds this, please know it was not an accident. He locked us in. He locked us all in. Please tell someone what really happened here." Art closed the diary, his hands trembling. The sounds of the old house no longer seemed innocent. They were echoes of a 30-year-old scream. He looked at Max, who had been sitting silently, watching him with an unwavering gaze. The dog rested his head on Art's knee, a comforting weight in the suffocating stillness. This was no longer just an old house with a sad history. It was a crime scene. And his dog, his silent, steadfast partner, had just handed him the first piece of evidence. Lila's diary changed everything. The manor was no longer just a collection of wood and stone. It was a witness. Its silence was not empty, but filled with the unheard voices of the children who had perished within its walls. Art held the small book, a tangible piece of a 30-year-old nightmare, and knew he had a choice. He could walk away, abandon this place to its ghosts and its secrets, or he could honor the final, desperate plea of a 12-year-old girl. Looking at Max, who sat watching him with an unnerving intelligence, Art knew there was no real choice at all. The days that followed were thick with a new kind of tension. Max's behavior grew stranger. He would be trotting at Art's side down the grand, dusty hallway, only to stop dead, his head cocked, his gaze fixed on an empty space in the air. He would follow the movement of something unseen, his eyes tracking it across a room before letting out a soft whine. He once stood for a full 10 minutes, growling low in his throat at an empty rocking chair in what must have been a nursery, the hair on his back rigid. Art's military training had taught him to trust his partner's instincts without question, and Max's instincts were screaming that they were not alone. Art knew he needed facts. He needed to know the official story, the lie that had been told to the world. He drove the rattling Ford into the center of Blackwood Creek, a town that seemed trapped in time, with a single main street, a general store, and a small brick library. Max waited patiently in the truck while Art went inside. The librarian, a stern-faced woman who looked at him with open suspicion, informed him that the newspaper archives from 1994 were unfortunately missing, likely due to a basement flood years ago. It felt too convenient to be true. Defeated for the moment, he was heading back to his truck when he noticed a small, meticulously kept cottage next to the manor's property line. An elderly woman was kneeling in her garden, tending to late-blooming mums. As Art approached, she looked up, shielding her eyes from the weak sun. She was a woman who must have been in her late 70s, with a wiry, resilient frame and a face full of sharp, intelligent lines. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, the color of a pale winter sky, were clear and missed nothing. She was Beatrice Hemlock, a retired teacher who had lived in that cottage for over 50 years. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Arthur Corrigan. Folks in town are talking. I guess a $1 house will do that," Art replied, offering a small, tired smile. Max padded over and sat politely at his side, watching Mrs. Hemlock with a calm, steady gaze. "That it will," she said, her eyes drifting from Art to the imposing silhouette of the manor. "That house has held on to its sadness for a long time. Some things are better left undisturbed." Her words were not a threat, but a quiet, weary warning. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and walked to her porch, returning with a small jar of homemade jam. A welcome to the neighborhood, even a haunted one. Art took the jar. "Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated, Lila's diary feeling heavy in his jacket pocket. "The tragedy at the orphanage. I was trying to read about it." Beatrice's expression became guarded. "Some stories aren't meant to be read, Mr. Corrigan. They're meant to be learned from, and then let go. Be careful what you go digging for. You might not like what you unearth." With a final, meaningful look, she retreated into her cottage, leaving Art with more questions than answers. The town's answer to his questions arrived the next morning. A clean, white county truck pulled up the driveway, and a portly man in a uniform stepped out. He introduced himself as a county building inspector, his tone officious and hostile. He spent less than 10 minutes inside, his eyes scanning the decay with a look of grim satisfaction. "This place is a death trap, Corrigan," the inspector announced, clipboard in hand. "Faulty wiring, structural instability, black mold. I could list a dozen violations right now. You've got 1 week to begin significant repairs, with permits, or I'm condemning the property and you're out. And getting permits around here can take months." The timing was no coincidence. Art knew it. Someone had sent this man. Someone had seen him asking questions at the library. The final warning came later that afternoon. After the inspector left, a furious energy propelled Art. He needed supplies, needed to feel like he was fighting back, even if it was just by nailing a new board in place. He grabbed his keys and strode out to his truck. He stopped short in the driveway. The 2 front tires were completely flat, slumped on their rims in the gravel. He knelt down and saw the clean, deliberate slits in the rubber. They had been slashed with a knife. Art stood slowly, the cold fury rising in his chest. This was a clear, unambiguous message. He was not welcome here. His questions were not welcome. The truth was not welcome. He looked back at the dark, silent manor, a place of forgotten children and violent secrets. Then he looked down at Max, who had come to stand beside him, a low, menacing growl vibrating in his chest, his eyes fixed on the empty road leading back to town. The whispers from the past had become a threat in the present. And Art Corrigan knew, with the chilling certainty of a soldier on enemy ground, that he and his dog were now in a fight for more than just the truth. They were in a fight for their lives. The slashed tires were a declaration of war. To Art, who had spent years learning to read the quiet threats of a hostile landscape, the message was as clear as a gunshot in the night. He spent the better part of the day patching the tires, his movements calm and methodical, but his mind was a storm of cold fury. He worked in the oppressive silence of the manor's shadow, the feeling of being watched a constant, prickling presence on his skin. They had underestimated him. They thought a building inspector and a knife in the dark would be enough to make the haunted veteran run. They were wrong. The next morning, Art decided to clear the tangled wilderness that had once been the manor's garden. It was hard, physical work, a way to channel his anger into something productive. While he wrestled with thorny brambles and thick ivy, Max patrolled the area, his senses on high alert. Suddenly, the dog froze. He stood near the base of a massive, gnarled oak tree, whose roots buckled the earth like ancient knuckles. His nose twitched, and a low whine escaped his throat. Then, he began to dig. "Max, no." "Leave it," Art commanded, wiping sweat from his brow. But this was the same focused intensity Max had shown with the floorboard. He ignored Art completely, his powerful front paws sending clumps of dark soil and dead leaves flying. He was digging with a purpose, a desperate need to uncover what lay beneath. This time, Art didn't hesitate. Trusting his partner completely, he grabbed a shovel from his truck and joined the effort. A few feet down, the shovel struck something hard with a dull clang. Art knelt and cleared the remaining dirt with his hands, unearthing a small, heavily rusted metal box. The lock had long since corroded away. With a bit of effort, he pried the lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of what had once been velvet, was a single object, an old, ornate brass key. It was heavy in his palm, unlike any modern key. Its head was intricately designed, though the details were obscured by a greenish patina of age. It was a key that belonged to something important, something meant to be kept secret. He knew immediately who he had to see. With Max at his heels, he walked the short distance to Beatrice Hemlock's cottage. She opened the door before he could knock, her sharp eyes taking in the key in his hand and the grim set of his jaw. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They slashed my tires," he said, his voice flat, "and my dog just dug this up in the garden." He held out the key. Beatrice took it, her fingers tracing its strange design. She looked at it for a long time, her expression a mixture of fear and something else. Something that looked like resolve. "I have never seen this key before in my life," she said finally, handing it back. "But I know what it feels like. It feels like trouble that's been buried for a very long time." She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not just a wary neighbor, but an ally. "You need to be careful, Mr. Corrigan. You are stirring a hornet's nest." "I know," Art said, "but I don't know where to go from here." "Yes, you do," Beatrice corrected him gently. "If anyone knows about old locks and secrets in this town, it's Donovan, Deputy Sheriff Donovan. He was just a rookie back when the fire happened, but that case, it marked him. I know he never truly let it go. Show him that key." Returning to the manor, Art felt a new path opening before him. A dangerous one, but a path nonetheless. The weight of the key in his pocket was a constant reminder of the secrets this place held. That evening, as the house settled into its nightly chorus of groans and whispers, Art found himself drawn to the last sealed part of his own past. A large, dust-covered steamer trunk that held the last of his wife Chloe's belongings. He had avoided opening it for 2 years, the pain too raw, the memories too sharp. But now, facing a different kind of ghost, he felt a desperate need to connect with her strength, her courage. He lifted the heavy lid. The scent of her perfume, faint and floral, rose to meet him, a gut punch of memory. Inside were her clothes, her books, and tucked in the bottom, several neatly labeled boxes of her work files. Chloe had been a brilliant investigative journalist, a woman who believed the truth was always worth fighting for. He ran his fingers over the boxes, a sense of profound loss washing over him. He picked one at random, a simple cardboard file box, and set it on the floor. It was filled with notebooks and microcassette tapes. He pulled out the top notebook, a standard spiral-bound one like hundreds she had filled over her career. He opened it to the first page, his breath catching in his throat. Written in Chloe's familiar, elegant script were the words that would forever connect his past, his present, and his terrifying future. Initial investigation. Blackwood Creek Orphanage Fire, August 1994. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a half-forgotten dream. She had been here. His Chloe had been investigating this very house, this very tragedy, and she had died just a few months later. He looked from the notebook in his trembling hands to Max, who had come to sit beside him, resting his head comfortingly on Art's lap. The mystery of Blackwood Manor was no longer just about Lila and the other children. It was about Chloe, too. And Art knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would not leave this place until he had uncovered the truth, no matter the cost. Sleep was a stranger to Art that night. He sat at the dusty dining table, a single lantern casting a pool of gold in the oppressive darkness, with Chloe's notebook open before him. Max lay at his feet, a warm and solid anchor in the swirling chaos of Art's thoughts. He read his wife's words, her sharp insights and dogged pursuit of the truth, and felt a profound, aching connection to her. She had been here. She had walked these same dark hallways, had sensed the same deep wrongness, and had started a fight that had ultimately cost her her life. The grief was a physical weight in his chest, but beneath it, something else was taking root. A cold, hard resolve. This was no longer just about the children. This was for Chloe. The next morning, Art left Max on guard at the manor and drove into town. The Blackwood Creek police station was a small, unassuming brick building that looked more like a post office than a center of law enforcement. A young deputy sat behind a tall counter, looking bored as he scrolled through his phone. "I need to see Deputy Sheriff Donovan," Art said, his voice steady. The deputy looked up, unimpressed. "He's busy. Tell him it's about the Blackwood Manor fire from 1994, Art said. "Tell him I have something he needs to see." The deputy's bored expression faltered. He disappeared into a back office and returned a moment later, followed by an older man. Deputy Sheriff Donovan was in his late 50s, a man who looked worn down by the slow, grinding passage of time in a small town. His shoulders stooped slightly inside his uniform, and his face was etched with lines of weariness. But his eyes, a sharp and intelligent gray, held a flicker of something that had not yet been extinguished. They assessed Art with a quick, professional glance. "You have something for me?" Donovan asked, his voice a gravelly monotone. "It's better if I show you in private," Art replied. Donovan led him into a small, cluttered office that smelled of stale coffee and old paperwork. Art laid out the facts, starting with the diary and ending with the threats. He watched Donovan's face for any reaction, but the deputy's expression remained a stony mask of professional neutrality. Art knew this was his last chance. He reached into his pocket and placed the heavy, ornate brass key on the corner of the desk. The effect was instantaneous. Donovan froze, his hand hovering over a stack of files. The color drained from his face, and his professional mask crumbled, revealing the haunted man beneath. He stared at the key, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Where?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Where did you get this?" "My dog dug it up in the garden," Art answered. Donovan sank heavily into his chair, his eyes never leaving the key. "For 30 years," he breathed. 30 years I wondered what happened to it." He looked up at Art, his gaze filled with a pain so old it had become a part of him. "I was a rookie, just 25 years old, one of the first men on the scene that night. What I saw, it never leaves you. The smoke, the smell, the claw marks on the inside of the dormitory door." His voice dropped lower, thick with a lifetime of suppressed rage. "We knew it was wrong. The fire marshal found evidence of accelerants. We all saw the doors were locked from the outside. The initial evidence was overwhelming. My sergeant, a man named Henderson, he ordered me to collect all the most damning items into a single evidence locker. The fire marshal's preliminary report, the first witness statements, the crime scene photos that were too graphic to release. He said he was securing it for the state investigation." Donovan leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "The next day, the state investigators were called off. Henderson told me the key to the locker had been lost in the confusion. He filed a report that contradicted everything we had seen. The fire was ruled an accident caused by faulty wiring, and I was told, in no uncertain terms, to forget what I saw if I wanted to have a career in law enforcement. I never forgot." He stood up, his decision made. "I'm 2 months from retirement, Corrigan. I've got nothing left to lose." He picked up the key. "Follow me." He led Art down a narrow staircase into the station's basement archives. The air was cool and smelled of mildew and decaying paper. In a far corner, behind stacks of old file boxes, was a single, gray metal locker covered in a thick coat of dust. A faded evidence tag from 1994 was still wired to its handle. Donovan's hand trembled slightly as he inserted the key. It turned with a loud grating click that echoed in the silence. He pulled the heavy door open. Inside was a single, thick accordion file, yellowed with age. Donovan lifted it out and placed it on a nearby table. He opened it, revealing a sheaf of documents and a large manila envelope. On top was the fire marshal's report. Art read the conclusion, his blood running cold. Multiple points of origin and presence of chemical accelerants are consistent with arson. Evidence indicates all dormitory exits were secured from the outside prior to the fire's ignition. Donovan handed Art the manila envelope. These were never supposed to see the light of day. Art pulled out the black and white photographs. They were stark and brutal. One showed a close-up of a child's desperate scratch marks, gouged deep into the wood of a door. Another showed a heavy padlock, still engaged, on the outside of that same door, the metal warped by heat. It was undeniable proof. It was the truth, hidden away in a forgotten locker for 3 decades. Art looked up from the horrific images. Donovan was watching him, his face a mask of grim vindication. "Now you see," the deputy said, his voice heavy. "Now you see what I've had to live with all these years." Art drove back to the manor in a state of numb shock. The copies of the suppressed report and the horrific photographs lay on the passenger seat, a testament to a truth so monstrous it felt unreal. The world outside his truck seemed distant and muted, the vibrant autumn colors of the main landscape nothing more than a blur. He was no longer just the owner of a haunted house. He was the keeper of its darkest secret, a secret that had been sealed with the lives of 19 children. Max, waiting on the porch, greeted him not with a wagging tail, but with a low whine, sensing the profound shift in his human spirit. Inside, the oppressive silence of the house seemed to press in on him. He walked to the dining room and cleared the large, dusty table. He laid out the copies of Donovan's evidence on one side. Then, with a heavy heart, he retrieved the box of Chloe's research. He needed to see it all together, to find the connection he knew must exist. He spread her notebooks, files, and maps across the table, creating a mosaic of 2 investigations, separated by years but joined by tragedy. His hands trembled as he touched her familiar handwriting, each word a fresh wound in his heart. For hours he worked under the dim glow of the lantern, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. He read about Simon Blackwood's supposed philanthropy, the town's praise for his orphanage, and the official, sanitized account of the fire. Then he found the notebook. It was thicker than the others, its pages filled with Chloe's relentless pursuit of a story no one wanted told. He read her notes on the suspicious lack of public records, her interviews with former orphanage staff who spoke in fearful whispers, and her theories about a systematic cover-up. He turned a page and saw a phrase she had underlined 3 times. The Blackwood Conspiracy. As his eyes scanned those 3 words, the dusty manor around him dissolved. The smell of old wood and decay was replaced by the familiar aroma of coffee and toast. He was standing in the sunlit kitchen of their old home 2 years ago. Chloe was at the table, her laptop open, her face alight with the fierce passion she always had when she was closing in on a story. "It's not just a cold case, Art," she was saying, her voice a vivid echo in his memory. "It's a cover-up, a fire that wasn't a fire, in a small town in Maine called Blackwood Creek. 19 kids died, and the official story is full of holes. But every time I get close to a source, they go quiet. It's like the whole town is in on the secret." He remembered nodding, only half listening as he packed his lunch for work. His mind had been on other things that day, on his own struggles, on the quiet anxieties that were a constant hum beneath the surface of his life. "Just be careful, Chloe," he had said, his voice distant. "I'm always careful," she had replied, her eyes sparkling. "But someone has to speak for those kids. Powerful people are burying their secrets there. It's the Blackwood Creek case, Art. Something is deeply wrong there." The memory shattered, and Art was back in the cold, dark manor, the lantern light flickering on the page. His breath came in ragged gasps. Blackwood Creek. She had told him the name. He had heard it, registered it, and then, in the fog of his grief after her death, he had buried it. But it hadn't disappeared. It had lingered in the deepest part of his subconscious, a seed of a memory waiting for a spark. The $1 ad had been that spark. He hadn't chosen this place by chance. He had been led here, guided by the last, desperate echo of his wife's fight. With a surge of adrenaline, he tore through the rest of her files. He found her research on local genealogies, tracing family lines back through the decades. He found a page where she had mapped out the Blackwood family tree, and there it was. A line drawn from Simon Blackwood to his great-grandson, a man who had changed his name before entering politics. A man named Thomas Thompson, the current mayor of Blackwood Creek. Beneath the name, Chloe had written a note. "Source confirms Thompson has been making payments to key families for decades. He is protecting his great-grandfather's legacy. He is the heart of the conspiracy." Her final note was a chilling entry in her calendar, dated 2 days before her car lost control on that rain-slicked highway. Interview with confidential source. Has proof linking Thompson directly to cover-up payments. The truth crashed down on Art with the force of a physical blow. The faulty brakes. The police report that called it a tragic, unavoidable accident. It was all a lie. They had killed her. She got too close to exposing the mayor, and he had silenced her, just as his great-grandfather had silenced 19 children with fire and locked doors. The mission, which had started as a duty to the ghosts of the manor, was now scorched with the fire of personal vengeance. The deep, aching grief he had carried for 2 years transformed, hardening into a razor-sharp point of purpose. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn photograph of Chloe, her smile bright and fearless. He looked from her face to the evidence spread before him, a roadmap of murder and deceit. He looked at Max, who had rested his heavy head on Art's knee, sensing the profound shift in his master. The sorrow was still there, but now it had an edge of cold, deadly fury. "I'm going to finish it, Chloe," Art whispered into the silent house. "I swear to you, I'm going to finish what you started." He wasn't just fighting for the dead children anymore. He was fighting for her, and he would not rest until the man responsible for all this pain had paid for everything. A dangerous calm settled over Art in the wake of his discovery. The crushing weight of his grief for Chloe remained, but it had been reforged into something else, something with a hard, sharp edge. Fear was a luxury he could no longer afford. He spent the morning on the phone with Donovan, the two of them methodically piecing together a 30-year-old conspiracy. Donovan was grim, his voice a low whisper over the line, as if he feared the very walls had ears. "You need to understand who you're dealing with, Art," Donovan warned. "Thompson isn't just the mayor. His family's money built half this town. He has people on his payroll in every department, including this one. Now that he knows I'm helping you, he's going to feel cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind." As if summoned by the deputy's words, Art's old flip phone began to vibrate on the table. The screen showed an unknown local number. Max, who had been lying quietly at Art's feet, lifted his head, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. Art's hand was steady as he answered the call. "Hello? Mr. Corrigan? This is Mayor Thompson. I was hoping I might have a moment of your time." The voice was exactly as Art had imagined it, smooth, polished, and oozing a practiced political charm. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed, a man who believed he was untouchable. "I'm listening," Art said, his own voice devoid of emotion. Max rose to his feet, his body going rigid. The growl in his chest grew louder, a sound of pure primal animosity. He stared at the phone in Art's hand as if it were a physical enemy. Art placed a steadying hand on his dog's back, the thick fur tense as coiled steel beneath his palm. "Good," Thompson said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "I've been hearing some troubling reports, Arthur, that you've been having some difficulty settling in at the old Blackwood place, that you've been upsetting people by digging up old-town tragedies. As the mayor, I just wanted to reach out and offer my assistance. Sometimes an outsider can misunderstand our local history." "I don't think I'm misunderstanding anything, Mayor," Art replied, his voice as cold as the air in the manor. "I'm not stirring up tragedies. I'm uncovering crimes." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Thompson spoke again, the mask of civility had vanished. His voice was flat, devoid of its earlier warmth, and laced with a chilling menace. "You're a stubborn man, Corrigan, just like your wife," he said, and the mention of Chloe's name sent a jolt through Art's body. "She was a very curious woman, your Chloe, a talented journalist, but she didn't understand that some stories in Blackwood Creek are best left buried. She was warned. She didn't listen. Her stubbornness led to a very unfortunate accident on a wet road." The threat, so blatant and cruel, hung in the air between them. It was a confession and a warning, delivered with the casual arrogance of a man who had never faced consequences. "I'm offering you a choice she never had," Thompson continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Pack your bags, take that dog of yours, and drive away. Forget you ever saw this town. Forget the names you've learned. If you do, you can live a long life. If you don't, I simply cannot guarantee that you won't suffer a similar, unfortunate accident." Art looked at the evidence spread across his table. Lila's diary, the horrific crime scene photos, Chloe's meticulous notes. He felt the protective rumble vibrating through Max's powerful body. The grief and the pain and the rage of the last 2 years coalesced into a single point of unyielding defiance. He was a soldier. He did not run. "It's too late for threats, Thompson," Art said, his voice quiet but ringing with absolute conviction. "You think you can just erase people? 19 children, my wife, and who knows how many others. You're wrong. You are making a fatal mistake," Thompson hissed. "No," Art said, cutting him off. "You made your mistake when you killed my wife. You made it when you let me and my dog into this house. You took everything from me. That means I have nothing left to lose." He stood up, looking out the grimy window at the decaying garden, at the town that had hidden its sins for so long. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to finish what Chloe started. And I'm going to tell the world your real name, Thomas Edmund Ashford. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did, what your family did. I am going to tear your whole world down." He ended the call, snapping his phone shut with a final decisive click. The line had been drawn. The battle was no longer one of whispers and secrets. It was now a war out in the open. The room was deathly quiet, the silence broken only by Max's deep, continuous growl and the frantic, furious beating of Art's own heart. He knew Thompson would not wait long to act. He had to move faster. He knelt down and looked into his dog's fierce, loyal eyes. "He's coming for us, buddy," Art whispered. Max responded by licking his hand, then turning to face the door, a silent, gray-furred sentinel ready for the fight. They were in this together, until the very end. The click of the phone ending the call was like the cocking of a hammer. The threat was no longer a shadow. It had a name and a voice. Art immediately called Donovan, his voice low and urgent, relaying the conversation with Thompson word for word, including the explicit threat referencing Chloe's death. He confessed. "Donovan," Art said, his voice tight. "He as much as admitted he killed her." "I know, son." Donovan's weary voice came back over the line. "And that's the mistake that's going to burn him. A threat against a citizen is one thing. A mayor unofficially confessing to murder to the victim's husband is something else. I'm taking this to the state police. It's enough to get them to open an official investigation, one that Thompson can't control. Just stay put. Don't leave the property. He's desperate now." While Art was on the phone, Max had become restless. He wasn't tracking ghosts in the hallways or growling at shadows. He was focused on the front of the house, whining at the main door, pawing at it until Art finally let him out onto the sagging porch. Max immediately trotted to the edge of the porch, jumped down, and began sniffing intently at the manor's foundation. He stopped at a large cornerstone, a block of granite that had shifted slightly over the decades, a small gap visible between it and the surrounding stones. He began to paw at it, looking back at Art with that familiar urgent insistence. After his call with Donovan, Art went out to see what had captured his dog's attention. He saw the loose stone and understood. Armed with his crowbar, he worked the heavy block free from its resting place of over a century. In the dark, hollowed-out space behind it, he found another package wrapped in oilcloth, much larger and heavier than Lila's diary. He carried it inside and laid it on the dining table, the entire history of his investigation now spread out before him. He carefully unwrapped the final secret. It was a massive leather-bound family Bible, its cover embossed with a single faded gold word, Blackwood. With trembling fingers, he opened it. The first few pages were exactly what he had prayed for. There, recorded in elegant, looping script, was the complete Blackwood family genealogy. He traced the lines with his finger, past Simon Blackwood, to his son, to his grandson, and finally, to the entry that sealed the conspiracy. Thomas Edmund Ashford, born the 12th of April, 1962, A second, more modern annotation had been added below it, documenting a legal name change in 1980 to Thomas Thompson. It was the irrefutable proof, the direct line from the monster who ran the orphanage to the man who ran the town. But the Bible held more than just names. Tucked carefully between the pages of Scripture, Art found folded ledger sheets and letters. They were meticulous records of corruption, payments to the former sheriff, donations to the campaign of a county prosecutor. A letter from a young Thomas Thompson to an associate, promising to uphold the family's legacy and manage all inquiries after his great-grandfather's death. It was the financial blueprint of the cover-up, a 30-year conspiracy documented in cold, hard numbers. Art knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He called Beatrice and Donovan and told them what he had found. The Bible was the final piece, the key that unlocked everything. Hearing the names on the ledger sheets, names of families she had known her whole life, Beatrice made a decision. "It's time," she said, her voice shaking with a righteous anger that had been simmering for decades. "The town has been silent for too long because we were all afraid. We were afraid of losing our jobs, our homes. But fear has allowed this sickness to fester. It stops tonight." She and Donovan began to make calls. They called the children and grandchildren of the fire's victims. They called the former orphanage workers who had been fired for asking questions. They called the families who had always whispered that the official story of the fire felt wrong. The news spread through Blackwood Creek, not like a rumor, but like a tidal wave of shared grief and anger, washing away 30 years of fear. As dusk began to settle, casting a purple glow over the main landscape, a single pair of headlights appeared at the end of the manor's long driveway. An elderly couple got out of their car. The woman held a single white candle. Art watched from the window as the man lit it, the small flame flickering bravely in the twilight. They were the parents of Michael, age 9, one of the names carved into the bedroom wall. Then another car arrived, and another. Soon, the quiet country road in front of the manor was lined with people. They were young and old, the faces of a town finally ready to confront its past. They brought candles, creating a river of light in the growing darkness. They didn't shout or make speeches. They just stood, a silent, powerful vigil. They were not there to protest. They were there to protect. They were standing guard, bearing witness. They were a human shield, their small flames pushing back against the immense darkness that had haunted their town for so long. Art stood at the window, the heavy Bible open on the table behind him, and watched the sea of lights grow. He saw the faces in the crowd, weary but resolute, united in their quiet defiance. Max came and stood beside him, pressing his solid weight against Art's leg, a silent promise of loyalty. For the first time since he had arrived in Blackwood Creek, a broken man seeking refuge, he did not feel alone. He felt the strength of a community rising from the ashes of its own shame, ready to fight alongside him. The battle was no longer his alone. The sea of candlelight outside the manor held the darkness at bay. Inside, Art felt a sense of borrowed time, the quiet hours before a final, decisive battle. He knew the state police were coming at dawn, a cavalry summoned by Donovan's desperate call. But there was one last piece of the puzzle, a final horror that he needed to confirm before they arrived. He sat at the table, Chloe's last notebook open before him. His eyes fell on a cryptic, hurried entry she must have made near the end. Source mentioned basement, furnace. Wall sounds hollow. The first 7? The first 7. The children who had disappeared before the fire. Art's blood ran cold. Chloe had known. She had known where to look. He stood up, a grim resolve settling over him. He grabbed his lantern and a heavy sledgehammer. "Come on, Max," he said quietly. "Let's finish this." The basement was a place of deep, chilling cold. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rust from the hulking, octopus-like furnace that dominated the center of the room. As Art approached the furnace, Max began to whine, pressing close to his leg, his body trembling not with fear, but with a kind of sorrowful reverence. Following Chloe's instructions, Art began tapping the brick wall behind the furnace with the hammer. Tap, tap, thud, tap, tap, thud. Then he found it. A section of the wall that answered with a deep, hollow echo. He was about to swing the sledgehammer when Max froze. The dog's whine cut off, replaced by a low, menacing growl that was the most dangerous sound Art had ever heard him make. Max wasn't looking at the wall. He was staring, rigid and unblinking, at the top of the stone steps that led down into the darkness. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Art's training kicked in. He silently extinguished the lantern, plunging the basement into near-total blackness, and moved into the shadows beside the furnace, one hand resting on Max's back to keep him quiet. They waited, listening to the soft, stealthy footsteps moving through the house above them. The footsteps headed for the basement door. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, a dark silhouette against the faint moonlight filtering through the manor's grimy windows. The figure descended slowly, a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The beam swept across the room and landed on Art. "I knew you'd find your way down here," a voice said, ragged with a lack of sleep. It was Mayor Thomas Thompson. He stepped into the faint light, and Art could see he was no longer the polished politician. He wore an expensive suit, but his tie was loosened, his face was pale with sweat, and his eyes were wild with the frantic terror of a cornered rat. In his hand, he held a pistol. "Donovan called the state police," Thompson said, his voice a harsh whisper. "They're coming for me at sunrise, but they won't find anything. Not after I'm done here." He gestured with the gun toward the hollow section of wall. "My great-grandfather was a monster, but he was meticulous. He kept his greatest sins well hidden. I'm here to make sure they stay that way. And to clean up the last loose end." He leveled the gun at Art's chest. "Just like your wife, you never knew when to stop digging." Before Art could even think to move, Max exploded into action. He didn't lunge or bark. He moved with silent, deadly grace, placing himself directly between the gun and Art, a solid wall of gray and white fur. He stood his ground, his teeth bared, the growl in his chest a promise of lethal violence. "Get that beast out of the way!" Thompson screamed, his composure shattering. The standoff was absolute, a moment stretched thin by 30 years of secrets. Thompson's finger tightened on the trigger. In that split second, Max turned his head slightly, his attention fixed on the hollow wall beside him. He nudged a single, loose brick with his powerful nose. The brick shifted, dislodged by the dog's push, and from the small, dark cavity behind it, something small and silver fell, clattering softly on the dusty concrete floor. It was a tarnished silver locket. The sight of it seemed to mesmerize them all. Then, Max did something extraordinary. He took a soft, deliberate step forward. He lowered his head and, with the utmost gentleness, pushed the locket with his nose. He slid it across the grimy floor until it came to a stop just inches from the toe of Thompson's polished leather shoe. At that exact moment, the basement door at the top of the stairs burst open. "Thompson! State Police! Drop the weapon! It's over!" Donovan's voice boomed through the cellar, followed by the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. The combination of events was too much for Thompson's fractured mind. The silent, unwavering courage of the dog, the impossible appearance of a child's lost locket, the final, inevitable arrival of the law. It was the symbolic checkmate for a game he had been losing his entire life. The strength drained out of him, his shoulders slumping in utter defeat. The gun clattered from his nerveless fingers. He sank to his knees, his vacant eyes fixed on the small silver locket. "I did it," he whispered, the words spilling out of him in a torrent of guilt and exhaustion. "I covered it all up. The bribes, the threats, your wife." He looked up at Art, tears streaming down his face. A broken man confessing to the ghosts that had haunted him forever. "I killed her. I killed them all. I did it all. To protect him. To protect a monster." Donovan and 2 state troopers descended the stairs, their weapons drawn. They saw the gun on the floor, the kneeling, sobbing mayor, and the man and his dog standing guard over a 30-year-old tomb. Art placed a hand on Max's back, the steadying weight of his loyal partner, the only thing keeping him upright. They had done it. The truth was finally free. 6 months later, the Blackwood Manor was no longer a place of shadows and secrets, but of light and new beginnings. The long, brutal winter of Maine had given way to a hesitant, hopeful spring. Green shoots pushed through the thawing earth, and the air was filled with the promise of new life. The trial of Thomas Thompson had been swift and devastating. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including his own recorded confession from that night in the basement, the Blackwood family Bible, Chloe's meticulous research, Lila's diary, and the testimony of Deputy Sheriff Donovan and Beatrice Hemlock, Thompson had crumbled. He was found guilty on multiple counts of obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, and the murder of Chloe Corrigan. The bodies of the 7 children found behind the false wall in the basement, positively identified through DNA, sealed his fate and that of his great-grandfather, Simon Blackwood. Justice, slow and agonizing, had finally come for the 19 lost souls of Blackwood Creek. Art watched it all from a distance, attending the key parts of the trial, but mostly allowing Donovan and the state prosecutor to carry the weight. The raw fury that had sustained him through the investigation had begun to recede, leaving behind a profound weariness, but also a quiet sense of peace. He had kept his promise to Chloe. He had exposed the truth. The manor itself had undergone a remarkable transformation. No longer the Gothic specter, it now stood proud and vibrant, freshly painted in a warm, welcoming cream, its slate roof repaired, its windows sparkling. The overgrown gardens had been cleared, replaced by neat pathways and flower beds, and a sturdy new sign, carved from local oak, stood at the entrance to the drive. It read, "The Chloe Corrigan Healing Center for Veterans and Service Dogs." It was Art's idea, a place of refuge, of healing, for those who, like him, carried invisible wounds from battles fought far from home. A place where the bond between a veteran and their service dog was understood and honored. The center was funded by the substantial assets confiscated from Thomas Thompson and the Blackwood estate, a poetic justice that felt deeply satisfying. Max, now 6 years old, was no longer a sentinel against unseen threats. He was the center's unofficial mascot, a calm, reassuring presence for the arriving veterans, many of whom carried the same haunted look in their eyes that Art once had. He was still Art's shadow, but his days were filled with gentle pats, happy whines, and the joyful chase of squirrels in the vast, newly restored grounds. His fur, once tense with vigilance, was now soft and relaxed, reflecting the peace he had found. Art himself had changed. The lines of weariness still etched his face, but his eyes held a new light. The nightmares had lessened, replaced by dreams of Chloe, vibrant and smiling, giving him a quiet nod of approval. He spent his days overseeing the renovations, counseling new arrivals, and simply existing in the quiet, healing embrace of the manor. The memory of Chloe was no longer a searing wound, but a gentle, guiding presence, a quiet strength that pulsed through the very foundations of the center. One afternoon, Art sat on the newly painted wraparound porch, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. Max lay beside him, his head on Art's lap, enjoying the warmth of the spring sun. Beatrice Hemlock, now a frequent visitor and a volunteer at the center, brought them a plate of her famous lemon cookies. She was still sharp as a tack, but her eyes held a new lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It's beautiful, Art," she said, looking out at the sprawling grounds. "You and Max, you brought peace to this place, to this town." "We just finished what someone else started," Art replied, stroking Max's soft fur. "Chloe, Lila, Donovan, everyone who refused to let the truth die." Max let out a soft sigh, a sound of utter contentment. The ghosts, if they were still there, no longer felt like a threat. They felt like quiet guardians, watching over the place where their stories had finally been told. The names on the bedroom wall had been preserved, respectfully framed behind glass, a permanent memorial within the center. Lila's diary lay open in a display case in the main hall, her final entry a powerful reminder of the center's purpose. Art looked out at the rolling hills of Blackwood Creek, at the vibrant life that had returned to a place once synonymous with death. He thought of the long, dark journey he and Max had traveled, from brokenness to purpose, from despair to hope. They had been strangers, drawn by a whisper of fate to a haunted house. They had faced down a monster, exposed a generations-old conspiracy, and brought justice to the innocent. In doing so, they had not only healed a town, but had also found their own healing. Max lifted his head and licked Art's hand, his intelligent eyes meeting his master's. True. It was an unspoken promise, a shared understanding. Their mission was complete. They had found their home, their purpose, and their peace. The Blackwood Manor, once a tomb, was now a beacon of hope, its sorrow transformed into a legacy of love and remembrance. Art and Max's journey teaches us a profound lesson, that even in the deepest darkness, the unwavering loyalty of a true friend can be the light that guides us toward healing. It reminds us that love never truly dies. It simply finds new ways to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. If this story of courage and companionship touched your heart, you can help us give a voice to more tales just like it. By subscribing, commenting, or sharing, you become a vital part of our storytelling community. And we have another story waiting for you right now, in the video that has just appeared on your screen. We hope to see you there.